Section 48 of The Treasure Chest of My Bookhouse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bill Moseley. The Treasure Chest of My Bookhouse, edited by Olive Beaupré Miller. Gideon the Warrior. Judges 6, 1-16, 13-40, 7, 8, 22, 23, and 28. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of Midian 7 years. And the hand of Midian prevailed against Israel, and because of the Midianites, the children of Israel made them the dens which are in the mountains, and caves, and strongholds. And so it was that the Midianites came up, and the Amalekites, and the children of the east, and they encamped against the children of Israel, and destroyed the increase of the earth, and left no sustenance for Israel, neither sheep, nor ox, nor ass. For they came up with their cattle and their tents, and they came as grasshoppers for multitude, for they and their camels were without number, and they entered into the land to destroy it. And Israel was greatly impoverished because of the Midianites, and the children of Israel cried unto the Lord. And it came to pass, when the children of Israel cried unto the Lord, that the Lord sent a prophet unto the children of Israel, which said unto them, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I brought you up from Egypt, and brought you forth out of the land of bondage, and I delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of all that oppressed you, and drave them out from before you, and gave you their land. And I said unto you, I am the Lord your God. Fear not the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you dwell, but ye have not obeyed my voice. And there came an angel of the Lord, and sat under an oak which is in Ophrah, that pertained unto Joash the Abiezrite. And his son Gideon threshed wheat by the winepress, to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him, and said unto him, The Lord is with thee, thou mighty man of valor. And Gideon said unto him, O my Lord, if the Lord be with us, why then is all this befallen us? And where be all his miracles, which our fathers told us of, saying, Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord hath forsaken us, and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites. And the Lord looked upon him, and said, Go in this thy might, and thou shalt save Israel from the hands of the Midianites. Have not I sent thee? And Gideon said unto him, O my Lord, wherewith shall I save Israel? Behold, my family is poor in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. And the Lord said to him, Surely I will be with thee, and thou shalt smite the Midianites as one man. Then all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the children of the east were gathered together and pitched in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, and Abiezer was gathered after him, and he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, who also were gathered after him, and he sent messengers into Asher, and into Zebulun, and into Naphtali, and they came up to meet them. And Gideon said unto God, If thou wilt save Israel by mine hand, as thou hast said, behold, I will put a fleece of wool on the floor, and if the dew be on the fleece only, and it be dry upon all the earth beside, then shall I know that thou wilt save Israel by mine hand, as thou hast said. And it was so, for he rose up early on the morrow, and wring the dew out of the fleece, a bowl full of water. And Gideon said unto God, Let not thine anger be hot against me, and I will speak but this once. Let me prove, I pray thee, but this once with the fleece. Let it now be dry upon the fleece, and upon all the ground let there be dew. And God did so that night, for it was dry upon the fleece only, and there was dew on all the ground. Then Gideon and all the people that were with him rose up early, and pitched beside the well of Hay-rod, so that the host of the Midianites were on the north side of them, by the hill of Moreh in the valley. And the Lord said unto Gideon, The people that are with thee are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, Mine own hand hath saved me. Now, therefore, go to, proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, Whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead. And there returned of the people 22,000, and there remained 10,000. And the Lord said to Gideon, The people are yet too many. Bring them down unto the water, and I will try them for thee there. And it shall be that of whom I say unto thee, This shall go with thee, the same shall go with thee, and of whomsoever I say unto thee, The same shall not go with thee, the same shall not go. So he brought down the people to the water, and the Lord said unto Gideon, Every one that lappeth of the water with his tongue as a dog lappeth, him shalt thou set by himself, likewise every one that boweth down upon his knees to drink. And the number of them that lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, were 300 men. But all the rest of the people bowed down upon their knees to drink water. And the Lord said unto Gideon, By the 300 men that lapped will I save you, and deliver the Midianites into thine hand. Let all the other people go, every man unto his place. So the people took victuals in their hands, and their trumpets, and he sent all the rest of Israel, every man unto his tent, and retained but those 300 men only, and the host of Midian was beneath him in the valley. And it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him, Arise, get thee down unto the host, for I have delivered it into thine hand. But if thou fear to go down, go thou with Phurah thy servant down to the host. And thou shalt hear what they say, and afterward shall thine hand be strengthened to go down against the host. Then went he down with Phurah his servant unto the outside of the armed men that were in the host. And the Midianites, and the Amalekites, and all the children of the east lay along in the valley like grasshoppers for multitude, and their camels were without number as the sand by the seaside for multitude. And when Gideon was come, behold, there was a man that told a dream unto his fellow, and said, Behold, I dreamed a dream, and lo, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the host of Midian, and came unto a tent, and smote it, and it fell, and overturned it, that the tent lay along. And his fellow answered and said, This is nothing else save the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. For into his hand hath God delivered Midian and all the host. And it was so, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream, and the interpretation thereof, that he worshipped and returned into the host of Israel, and said, Arise, for the Lord hath delivered into your hand the host of Midian. And he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put a trumpet in every man's hand, with empty pitchers and torches within the pitchers. And he said unto them, Look on me, and do likewise. And behold, when I come to the outside of the camp, it shall be that, as I do, so shall ye do. When I blow a trumpet, I and all that are with me, then blow ye the trumpets also on every side of all the camp, and say, The sword of the Lord and of Gideon. So Gideon and the 100 men that were with him came unto the outside of the camp in the beginning of the middle watch, and they had but newly set the watch, and they blew the trumpets, and brake the pitchers that were in their hands. And the 3 companies blew the trumpets, and brake the pitchers that were in their hands, and held the torches in their left hands, and the trumpets in their right hand to blow withal. And they cried, The sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And they stood every man in his place round about the camp. And the Midianites thought an host was come upon them, and they ran, and the children of Israel shouted and put them to flight. And the 300 blew the trumpets, and the Lord set every man's sword against his fellow, even throughout all the host of Midian, and the Midianites fled. And the men of Israel gathered themselves together, and pursued after the Midianites. Then the men of Israel said unto Gideon, Rule thou over us, both thou and thy son's son also, for thou hast delivered us from the hand of Midian. And Gideon said unto them, I will not rule over you, neither shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. Thus was Midian subdued before the children of Israel, so that they lifted up their heads no more. And the country was in quietness 40 years in the days of Gideon. End of section 48. Recording by Bill Mosley, Llano County, Texas, USA.
Section 49 of the Treasure Chest of My Bookhouse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lynn Thompson. The Treasure Chest of My Bookhouse. Edited by Olive Beaupré Miller. Daniel in the Lion's Den. Daniel 6. It pleased King Darius to set over the kingdom of Babylon 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 presidents, of whom that Daniel who was of the captives of Judah was first, that the princes might give accounts unto the presidents, and the king should have no damage. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find none occasion nor fault, forasmuch as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. Then said these men, We shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king, and said thus unto him, King Darius, live for ever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the counselors and the captains, have consulted together to establish a royal statute, and to make a firm decree, that whomsoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing, that it be not changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being opened in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day, and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he did aforetime. Then these men assembled, and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. Then they came near, and spake before the king concerning the king's decree. Hast thou not signed a decree that every man that shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, save of thee, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, The thing is true according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Then answered they and said before the king, That Daniel which is of the children of the captivity of Judah regardeth not thee, O king, nor the decree that thou hast signed, but maketh his petition 3 times a day. Then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men assembled unto the king, and said unto the king, Know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is that no decree or statute which the king establisheth may be changed. Then the king commanded that they brought Daniel, and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, Thy God whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. And a stone was brought and laid across the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet, and with the signet of his lords, that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace, and passed the night fasting. Neither were instruments of music brought before him, and his sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning, and went in haste until the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God whom thou servest continually able to deliver thee from the lions? Then said Daniel unto the king, O king, live for ever. My God hath sent his angel, and hath shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me. Forasmuch as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. Then was the king exceeding glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found upon him, because he believed in his God. And the king commanded, and they brought those men which had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, and the lions had the mastery of them. Then King Darius wrote unto all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth. Peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and steadfast for ever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be ever unto the end. He delivereth and rescueth, and he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, who hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius, and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. End of section 49.
Section 50 of The Treasure Chest of My Bookhouse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jill Ingle. The Treasure Chest of My Bookhouse. Edited by Olive Beaupré Miller. The Adventures of Perseus, a Greek myth. There dwelt once in Argos a king's daughter named Danae, and her infant son Perseus. Now Acrisius, the father of Danae, had one day been terrified half out of his wits by the words of an oracle, which solemnly declared that the child of his daughter Danae should be the cause of his death. Thereafter, blindly accepting the words of the oracle as true, and heeding naught but his own foolish fears, Acrisius caused Danae and her son to be seized out of the strong tower wherein he had confined them, shut fast in an iron-bound chest, and cast into the sea. Up and down on the boundless deep rocked the chest, now borne high aloft on the crest of a giant wave, and now plunged headlong down into the foaming trough of the sea. Within, Danae held close her babe, and prayed to be delivered. Out and out they drifted, far and far and far. At last the waters heaved them up onto the shore of an island, and the chest was entangled fast in a fisherman's net. Now the fisherman was amazed when he drew up out of the sea an iron-bound box, and found it to contain a young mother and child of marvelous beauty. Straightway he led them to his own cottage, and commended them to the care of his wife. It then appeared that the name of the island whereon they had been cast was Seriphus, and the fisherman was Dictys, no less a personage than brother to King Polydectes himself. In the cottage of Dictys and his good wife, Danae and her son were sheltered till Perseus grew to manhood. Then it chanced one day that Polydectes cast his eyes on Danae, and determined to have her for his queen. But Danae would have none of Polydectes, for he was a tyrant both wicked and cruel. By this time Perseus was grown a youth of such strength and promise that he was well able to defend his mother. And Polydectes perceived that if he would worry the lovely Danae into becoming his bride, he must rid himself of her stalwart son. Therefore he called to him the young Perseus and said, "Youth, you have found in my kingdom an asylum and a home from the days of your infancy. Now that you are grown to manhood, it is but meet that you should repay the courtesy thus extended to you. You have reached the age when men of valor go venturing to rid the world of monsters. Go you, therefore, in quest of the Gorgon Medusa, who lays waste all the surrounding countryside, and show your face no more within my kingdom until you bring me her head." Now Perseus withdrew from the presence of King Polydectes, almost in despair. He would have shrunk from no ordinary adventure possible to a hero, but the Gorgons, as he knew full well, were the most hideous monsters in the world. 3 terrible sisters they were, hateful, venomous, cruel. They had faces like women, but their bodies were those of beasts, all covered with scales of brass and iron so hard that no sword could pierce them. Enormous were their wings, and they gleamed with sinister flash of golden feathers. They had tusks instead of teeth, and sharp, cruel, brazen claws. Their hair was writhing serpents that would curl and twist and hiss and dart out long forked tongues to sting. Worst of all, so hard and cold and hateful was their stare, that he who looked full in their faces froze immediately into stone. "Now how," mused Perseus, "is a man to give battle to such horrid creatures, when he may not even look on them?" Nevertheless, he bade a sad farewell to his mother, and wandered along the shore, lost in sorrowful thoughts and longing for some wise counsel. Suddenly there glowed about him a light 7 times brighter than the sun. He looked up in amazement, and lo, there before him, resting lightly on the sand, stood a beautiful woman in long white robes, with a shining helmet on her head, a staff in her hand, and a shield on her arm. Minerva, the goddess of wisdom herself. "Perseus," said she, "take this shield. So brightly is it polished that if you keep your eyes fixed upon it, you will see the Gorgons reflected therein, and can give them battle without ever needing to look in their faces." With a mighty leaping of his heart, Perseus gave thanks. Yet, he said, "Though I look in the shield, where shall I find among mortals a sword that can pierce through their heavy scales?" Even as he spoke, there came a slight rustling through the air, and hovering there on his other side appeared a youth with winged sandals and cap. In one hand a winged staff, about which 2 serpents were twined, and in the other a crooked sword that shone like a flame. "You shall use my sword," said the youth, for he was Mercury, messenger from Olympus, whence came the help of the gods to men who had deserved it. Then Minerva bade the young Perseus seek out the 3 grey sisters, cousins of the Gorgons, and force from them the secret of where the Gorgons' isle lay. Guided by Mercury, Perseus made off. Far, far to westward he journeyed, till he came to a barren, desolate shore, where was everlasting twilight. Grey was the sky, and grey were the giant rocks. Grey were the straggling trunks of the leafless trees, and grey was the misty sea. As the 2 approached the place, there loomed up before them 3 old hags, in flowing grey robes, with unkempt white locks hanging over their shoulders, scarce to be told from the great grey waves with crests of white that came dashing up on the shore. Perseus perceived that these 3 old hags possessed but 1 tooth and 1 eye among them. These they passed about from one to another, and each in turn clapped the tooth into her toothless gums, and the eye into his socket in her forehead. As Perseus and Mercury groped their way cautiously towards them, it became apparent that the old hags were just at that moment quarrelling over whose turn it was to have the eye. One held the brilliant orb gleaming in her hand, and all were scolding, gesticulating, screeching. Thus, the while they wrangled, not one of the 3 could see at all. "Quick," whispered Mercury to Perseus, "now is your chance. Seize the eye and do not return it till they tell you the secret. They will never tell you otherwise." In a flash, Perseus stepped forward, nimbly seized the eye, and withdrew again to a little distance. Then there burst forth a perfect storm from the 3 old hags, for each thought the other had snatched the eye. But Perseus cried out boldly, "I have your eye, I, a youth from beyond the seas, nor will I return it until you tell me where lies the island of the Gorgons." The old hags begged and whined and scolded. They tried to grope their way stealthily to him, to snatch back the eye unawares, but Perseus kept well out of reach and held firm. So at last they told him that he must go still farther westward, and there seek out certain nymphs who kept a pair of winged sandals, a magic pouch, and a wonderful helmet that could render its wearer invisible. These nymphs would direct him just how to reach the island of the Gorgons. At that, Perseus gave the grey women back their eye, and with Mercury journeyed once more forward. In good time they reached a beautiful glade in the forest, where the sunlight filtered in blotches of gold through the leaves, and a group of graceful nymphs, with wreaths and garlands of flowers, disported themselves around the banks of a clear blue pool. To them Perseus presented himself and told his tale. At once they hushed their mirth and musical laughter. "We will gladly aid the hero who goes forth to conquer the Gorgon, Medusa," they cried, and they tripped lightly away, brought back the winged sandals, and bound them on Perseus's feet. About his neck they hung the magic pouch, and placed on his head the helmet of darkness. When they had thus provided him, they pointed out the island of the Gorgons lying low, like a bank of dun grey clouds, on the dim horizon. Now in his winged sandals Perseus could mount up into the air as safely as Mercury. Far, far up he soared, cleaving the air like a bird, now skimming over the checkered green earth that lay spread out far below, and now over the shining blue sea. It was midnight when Perseus at length heard a calm voice speak by his side, grave, yet melodious and mild. "There, below," it said, "lies the island of the Gorgons." And now it was not Mercury who spoke, but Minerva, come once more in the hour of need to give Perseus counsel. Wrapped from sight in the helmet of darkness, Perseus sank downward. The moon was flooding the earth with silver, and he saw below him a rocky coast, stone, stone, everywhere stone, shining white and cold in the cold white light. Suddenly, from among the black shadows at the base of a barren cliff, there flashed a baleful gleam, and he knew it must be a moonbeam cast back from the horrid scales on the backs of the Gorgons. Boldly he descended thither. "Be cautious," said Minerva. "Look into your shield." Then, in the full glowing light of the moon, he looked into his shield, and behold, a hideous sight! The 3 hateful sisters fast asleep, their scales and golden wings glistening, their brazen claws outspread as though ready to clutch, the snakes on their heads writhing, even in sleep, and hissing now and again. Even as he looked, one of the dreadful creatures moved as though to awake. "That is Medusa," said Minerva. "Strike on the instant, and do not miss your first stroke." In a flash Perseus obeyed. The Gorgon opened her freezing eyes, but Perseus, looking ever into the shield, cleaved off the head with a single stroke of his sword, seized it, snakes and all, and dropped it into the magic pouch. "Well done!" cried Mercury. "Now fly," said Minerva, "for the others are awakening." On his winged sandals Perseus sped swiftly upward, but not a moment too soon. Medusa's sisters, awakened by the noise of his stroke, perceived what had been done, and flew in a frenzy of rage to the shore, every snake on their heads a-bristling with fury. He could hear the rushing of their wings, the rattle of their brazen claws, the hissing of the serpents as they mounted up into the air in pursuit, but thanks to the helmet of darkness he was hidden from their sight, and made off from them in safety. Perseus then bade farewell to Mercury and Minerva, and set out alone to return to Seriphus. But it chanced on the way that he passed through the country of Ethiopia, which was ruled over by King Cepheus. Now there was come up at this time out of the deep a terrible sea monster that ravaged the coast of Ethiopia, a huge, scaly creature with wings like a dragon and a tail like a fish. It came up and carried off oxen and people, and even destroyed whole villages. The men of Ethiopia had done all in their power to rid themselves of the monster, but in vain. There was not one among them able to stand before him. Then came forward a wise old man of the people and said, "Lo, our queen Cassiopeia, swelled with pride of her own beauty, did boast herself lovelier than the sea nymphs that drive their chariots with swift skimming dolphins through the waves. This frightful monster is come up out of the sea as a punishment to her vanity, and never will he retire till the guilty queen offer to him her dearest treasure, even Andromeda her daughter." Throughout all the kingdom, then, was weeping and wailing, and most of all in the palace. Nevertheless, the people must at all costs be rid of the monster, so they seized the lovely Andromeda, bound her fast with chains to a mighty rock on the shore, and left her a prey to the beast. Andromeda wrung her hands. The people stood afar off and watched, but they dared not let her free. Even Phineus, whose promised bride she was, stood by and made no effort to save her. Pale and motionless as a marble statue, save for her hair that waved in the breeze, she stood. Then, lo, up out of the sea like a mountain he rose, the great sea monster. Andromeda shrieked. The wretched mother and father wrung their hands. Phineus shrank back, slunk away, and hid himself in fear. But there, in that moment of despair, borne up in the air by his winged sandals, appeared the hero Perseus. "O Virgin," he cried, "undeserving those chains, I am come to deliver you." With a sudden swoop the youth darted on the back of the monster, lighting just at the base of the neck where the creature could not strike at him with his fangs. Into his shoulder Perseus plunged his sword. Now here, now there he worried him, piercing first this side then that, and darting ever out of his reach by means of his wings. With a furious splashing the monster churned all the water about into foam. At length Perseus's wings were drenched. He dared no longer trust them. Alighting now on a rock and holding fast to a projecting fragment as the monster floated near, he gave him his death blow. The serpent turned over on his back and floated with belly upward. The people, gathered on the shore, raised a shout till all the hills re-echoed. The parents, transported with joy, called Perseus their deliverer, and the hero himself released Andromeda from the rocks. Then was the lovely Andromeda promised to Perseus in marriage. Every house in the city was wreathed and hung with garlands. In the palace itself a banquet was spread, and all was joy and festivity. But suddenly a noise was heard of warlike clamor. With a numerous party of swaggering, brawling followers, there burst into the festal hall Phineus, demanding the maiden as his own. It was in vain that Cepheus cried, "You should have claimed her when she lay bound to the rock, the monster's victim. He who neglects his claim at such a time forfeits it altogether." Phineus made no reply, but hurled his javelin at Perseus. It missed its mark and fell harmless. Then the cowardly assailant ran and took shelter behind the altar. His act was the signal for a general onset by his band upon the guests of Cepheus. Perseus and his friends defended themselves, and maintained for some time the unequal conflict, but the numbers of the assailants were far too great. Destruction seemed inevitable. Then, with a loud voice, Perseus cried, "If I have any friend here, let him turn away his eyes." And he suddenly held aloft the head of the Gorgon Medusa. "Seek not to frighten us with your jugglery," cried one of the brawlers, and raised his javelin to throw. But lo! he was turned to stone in the very act. A second was about to plunge his sword into a prostrate foe, but his arm stiffened, and he could not thrust a hair's breadth forward. A third, in the midst of a taunting boast, froze with mouth wide open. Phineus, beholding the dreadful result of his unjust aggression, felt confounded. He called aloud to his friends, and got no answer. He touched them, and found them stone. Then he fell on his knees before Perseus, to sue for his own wretched life, but in the very attitude he, too, was turned to stone. Then was the marriage of Perseus and Andromeda fulfilled. King Cepheus gave Perseus a ship with stalwart rowers. He and his queen bade a fond farewell to their daughter, Andromeda, and Perseus and his bride set out for Seriphus. Now it happened that while Perseus had been away on his adventures, Polydectes had never once left off worrying Danae to force her to be his queen. His followers were as wicked as he, and in all the island was none to protect the lovely young maiden, save Dictys, the good fisherman. At last, in his anger, the king cast Danae and Dictys both into dungeons, and there the two lay languishing, when the ship of Perseus dropped anchor in the harbor. Perseus made straight for the palace. The king was at meat, surrounded by his wicked retainers. When he saw come into the hall the youth whom he had thought out of his way forever, he was sunk at first in confusion. In a moment more he cried out, "How dare you come here without the head of Medusa?" "O king," Perseus answered, "I have the head in my pouch." "Ho, ho," mocked the king. "If you have in truth performed this unheard-of act, then show us the head." "Nay," answered Perseus, "I am loath to hold it up. I tell you I have it here in my pouch." "Ho, ho," jeered all the king's followers. "He has it in his pouch, yet he will not produce it. Base deceiver! He but pretends to have done the deed. It is no Medusa head he has in his pouch. He dares not show us what lies there." "Come, come," called the king. "If you have there the head, out with it on the instant. Else with your own head you shall pay for the cheat." Threatening, taunting, gibing, the king's men pressed about Perseus. "As you will, then," shouted the hero, and he held it aloft, the snaky head of Medusa. In a flash, about him were a white marble hall, a white marble table, with white marble food and white marble statues of men. Having thus freed the island from the base tyranny of Polydectes, Perseus went to embrace his mother, set her free, and lead her to his Andromeda. Dictys likewise he freed and made king of Seriphus in place of his worthless brother. To Minerva Perseus returned her shield, along with the gift of the head of Medusa. To Mercury he gave back the sword. Then Perseus and Andromeda, with Danae their mother, once more sailed away, and after many adventures Perseus found a kingdom for himself. Long and wisely he reigned, and lived happily thenceforward. End of section 50. Recording by Jill Ingle.
Section 51 of The Treasure Chest of My Bookhouse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Draconis. The Treasure Chest of My Bookhouse, edited by Olive Beaupré Miller. The Labors of Hercules, a Greek myth. Among all the Greek heroes about whom the old Greek harpers sung, who was more dearly loved than Hercules? Hercules the patient, Hercules the strong. When Hercules was but a babe a few months old, his mother Alcmene left him once asleep in a brazen warrior's shield that served him for a cradle. There came creeping upon him while he slept 2 venomous serpents. Just as the snakes were about to strike, Hercules awoke. With a crow of delight, as though he had found a new plaything, and without a sign of fear, the little one seized the serpents, one in each hand. Straight by the neck he grasped them and held on tight. When his mother came in and found him thus, she was struck almost dumb at the sight. but the snakes were already strangled, and the infant Hercules safe. So began the strong man's conquests over evil. Hercules grew to manhood, possessed of marvelous courage and strength, and carefully trained in all that befitted a hero. One day, when he was still a youth, dwelling for a time among herdsmen on the mountains, he lay down in a lonely valley to sleep through the noonday heat. In his sleep he had a strange dream. He seemed to be following a path that suddenly split into two, branching off in opposite directions, and he knew not which road to take in order to pursue his journey. One road looked broad and easy, and led down to a pleasant city, whence he saw the gleam of marble palaces mid green and tempting gardens. The other was steep and rocky. It was hard to climb, and led endlessly upward, growing rockier and rougher at every step, till it disappeared in the clouds. As Hercules stood hesitating which road to choose, there came dancing down the smooth and easy highway a gay and laughing maiden. She beckoned to him and called, "Come with me, Hercules, down into the pleasant city. There you need not labor all day long in the heat of the sun. You may sit continually in fragrant gardens, hearken to the plash of fountains and the songs of birds, and slaves will serve you with all you need." As Hercules looked toward the city, the piping of merry music faintly reached his ears to invite and tempt him still further. But lo, just then in the second path appeared a second young maiden, quite different from the first. She wore plain white garments, and her eyes were grave, yet quiet, sweet and calm. "My sister deceives you, Hercules," she said. "The pleasant things offered you down below are not worth the having. They are toys of which you will tire in a day, and must be bought with a price of which you little dream. Do not descend thither, but climb the mountain path with me. You will find it rough and difficult, 'tis true, yet breasting its heights you will there find real delights of which you can never tire. Moreover, if you have the courage to climb, this road will lead you to Mount Olympus itself, and there you shall live forever with the gods who cannot die." And then in his dream Hercules turned his back on the gay and laughing maiden, and took the mountain road. Thus did he choose the labors by means of which he turned his strength to good account for men. Now Hercules had a cousin named Eurystheus, king of Mycenae, who was a few days older than he. It had therefore been decreed that Hercules should be the slave of Eurystheus, and in all things serve and obey him, only on condition that he successfully performed 12 tasks that Eurystheus should set him, could he ever again be free. When Hercules presented himself at the court of King Eurystheus, he was already remarkable for his broad shoulders and the enormous muscles of his arms, while Eurystheus was miserably puny, timid, frail, and weak. When Eurystheus for the first time beheld his powerful cousin, he was terrified at his strength, and he resolved to set him the hardest and most dangerous tasks that wit of man could possibly devise. At this time, in a beautiful grove that surrounded the temple of Jupiter in Nemea, a fierce lion had its den. This lion was laying waste the whole countryside, so the people lived in constant terror of its ravages. The first task which Eurystheus set Hercules was to kill the Nemean lion. The young man set out with only his bow and arrows for weapons, but as he journeyed along, he found a sturdy olive tree by the roadside. With a single wrench, he pulled up the whole stout tree by its roots and made himself a club. As he drew nearer the lion's haunts, nowhere did he meet with man, woman, or child, for all had been so terrified that they kept within doors, leaving their flocks to its mercy. At length Hercules came to the beautiful grove by the temple of Jupiter, and there he watched all day long. Towards night the lion came creeping home to its lair. It was a tremendous creature, fierce and terrible. Hercules twanged his bow and sent an arrow flying. The arrow struck the beast, but so tough was its hide that the sharp point glanced aside and fell harmless. The lion snarled, showed its fierce teeth, and looked about for its foe. A second arrow Hercules shot, but it glanced aside like the first. Ere he could shoot a third, the lion had espied him. It crouched and sprang straight at his throat. Hercules knocked it aside with a powerful blow from his club. Then, as it rose, ramping and clawing the air, he seized its neck with both hands and hung on fast till he slew it. His first task thus accomplished, Hercules went back to Eurystheus, wearing the skin of the lion over his shoulder, while the head of the beast rested on his own, like a kind of helmet. Henceforth, Hercules was always to be distinguished by the lion's skin which he wore, and the enormous club which he carried. When he came in such fashion into Eurystheus' presence, the coward was as frightened as though he had suddenly seen the Nemean lion itself before him. Yet when he was somewhat calmed, he said, "Hercules has slain the Nemean lion, 'tis true. Still the lion was but a beast after all. I will send him now to dispose of a hideous monster." So he sent for Hercules and bade him kill the powerful Lernaean Hydra. This Hydra was a tremendous serpent with 9 heads, one of which was immortal and could not possibly be slain. It had its den near a fountain that supplied all the region about with water, and it drove the unfortunate peasants away, so they had no means whatever whereby to slake their thirst. Hercules took with him his young nephew Aeolus, and off they started. In an oozy, evil-smelling marsh, they found the Hydra, twisting its 9 ugly heads in the air and breathing forth poison. Hercules made at it at once, but whatever he cut off a head, 2 grew in its place, so at every stroke it only became more formidable. "Ho, Aeolus, set fire to yon grove of trees," cried Hercules, "and keep me supplied with the burning brands." Then he applied a brand to the neck wherever he cut off a head, and so prevented the new heads from growing. At length the immortal head alone was left. This Hercules had cleaved from the body, but it still spit its venomous poison as fiercely as before. So Hercules rolled a huge rock over it and left it buried deep where it could never do further harm. Now when Eurystheus found that his cousin had slain the Hydra as well as the lion, he began to think there was no evil creature that Hercules could not kill. "But," he mused, "his third task shall be harder still. After all, it is no great task to kill. I shall bid him bring me alive the fierce Erymanthian boar." Accordingly, he gave orders, and off went Hercules as before. Straight to Mount Erymanthus he went and struggled long with the famous wild boar, but he caught him at length with his naked hands and brought him back on his shoulders. When King Eurystheus saw Hercules coming home with the boar alive on his shoulders, he was so badly frightened that he ran and jumped into a great bronze pot in one corner of his palace, pulling down the cover in haste to keep himself well out of sight. He did not run so quickly, however, but that Hercules caught just a glimpse of him as the cover went banging down. "Ho, ho!" he cried out gravely, but with a twinkling eye. "This pot is just the place in which to keep a boar that is like to tear men to pieces." And he quickly lifted the lid and popped in the boar on top of the king. Loud was the outcry, you may be sure, till Hercules dragged out the 2, the king in one hand, the boar in the other, both kicking, struggling, roaring. "His strength seems equal to any deed," said Eurystheus to himself. "Yet will I get the best of him this time by setting a task that demands not strength, but fleetness of foot and superhuman endurance." Then he summoned Hercules to him and bade him bring him alive the stag of Diana. This stag had often befooled the hunters of that region. It was most marvelously fleet of foot, and few had ever seen it, but report had said it had horns of gold and hoofs of brass. It could make the most wonderful leaps, and was never wearied, no matter how long the dogs might have chased it. It had been seen browsing oftener than elsewhere close to the steps of Diana's temple, and many people believed it was under the protection of that goddess. So Hercules set out for the temple of Diana, and watched and waited patiently. At last it appeared, the golden antlered creature, a sight of wondrous beauty. Every muscle a-quiver, it stood, cautious and alert, ready to dart away at the slightest whisper of danger. Hercules sprang towards it at once. It gave a mighty leap and made off, swift as the flying wind. But Hercules made after it, hot on its heels. Over hill, over dale it flew, through forest and meadow, over shallow stream and broad deep river, on and on and on. A whole year long it ran, over nearly the whole of Europe, and a whole year long Hercules followed, till at last he wearied it out, and it fled back, exhausted and panting, to seek shelter in Diana's temple. Even there Hercules would have seized it, but just then a flood of silver light shone gently around about, and there before him appeared a lovely lady in short white garments, with a bow and quiver at her back, and a half-moon on her crown. It was Diana herself, goddess of the moon and of the chase, and to her the stag ran trembling. "You must not lay hands on this stag," she said. "It belongs to me, but return to King Eurystheus, and tell him how your endurance has wearied it out, and how but for me you would have had it. I promise you he shall consider that your fourth labor is accomplished." Now Eurystheus was almost at a loss how further to test such a Hercules, but he thought, "I have tried his strength, his endurance, and agility. I will now try his wits, and send him on an adventure that only devising of some skillful plan can ever accomplish." In the valley of Stymphalus there had come an enormous flock of strange birds that did great damage to crops and herds, and even carried off children. These birds had claws of iron and feathers of metal, sharp at the end, which they had the power of throwing down on their enemies. No fleetness of foot, endurance, or bodily strength could dispose of such foes as these, that could not be prevented from darting up into the air out of reach. So Eurystheus bade Hercules save the valley of Stymphalus from these ugly birds. Hercules wisely decided at once not to fight with such creatures. Instead, he went quietly into the deep dark wood where they had their nests by the side of a noisome pool. Holding his bronze shield above his head to protect himself from their feathers, he rang a great bell, and at the same time beat on his shield with his lance. Frightened at this hideous noise, the birds flew up in such numbers that they darkened all the sky. As they flew over Hercules' head, their feathers fell fast like hail on his shield. But he continued to ring the bell and beat the shield till every one of the birds had disappeared from the place, so frightened by the noise that none ever dared return. Thereafter Eurystheus set Hercules 5 well-nigh impossible labors more. First, he must clean out in one day the filthy stables of King Augeas, wherein the king had kept 3,000 oxen for 30 years without ever cleansing their stalls. The refuse was piled mountain high, but Hercules dug a trench, turned the waters of 2 great rivers through the stables, and cleaned them thoroughly in one day. Then he must fetch to Mycenae alive the raging white bull of Crete. But he seized it by its horns and held it so firmly in spite of its terrible struggles that the bull saw it, had met its master, and followed him like a lamb. For his 8th labor he captured the savage man-eating horses of King Diomedes. For the 9th he brought back the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, a fierce tribe of warlike women who were never defeated in battle. For the 10th he overcame the giant Geryon with his 3 great bodies, his 3 great heads, and 6 arms that waved like a windmill. When Hercules always succeeded, his cousin was in despair. For his 11th labor, Eurystheus set him what he deemed the most impossible task of all. He bade him never again show his face in Mycenae unless he brought back 3 golden apples from the garden of Hesperides. For he knew full well that no man on earth knew where to find that garden. But Hercules would not be daunted. He set out to westward where the sky glows golden at sunset. There, thought he, behind that golden gate should lie such a garden of golden fruit. He journeyed long, and he journeyed far, but at last he came to a beautiful spot on the banks of a river, where a band of graceful river nymphs played hide-and-seek mid the rocks. As soon as they perceived the hero, they ran laughing, with ropes of flowers, to seize him and make him their prisoner. Then they led him into a shady beech grove, where they bade him sit on a grassy knoll, and offered him refreshment of luscious purple grapes. But Hercules would not linger. He begged the nymphs to tell him where lay the garden of Hesperides, of which he was in search. "You must seek out Proteus, the old man of the sea," they told him. "He knows every land whereon the ocean laps, but he will never tell you this secret unless you compel him. You must catch him and hold him fast, no matter what may happen, until he tells you the truth." Thanking the nymphs for their kindness, Hercules again set out. He followed the river on and on till he heard the mighty boom of the sea. Then he advanced cautiously to the shore, and there he saw, fast asleep, lulled by the roar of the waters, a little old man whose hair and beard flowed down like a tangle of seaweed. Here for certain was the old man of the sea himself, and no doubt at all about it. So Hercules stepped forward, quickly seized him by an arm and a leg, and held him fast. "Tell me," he cried, "where lies the garden of Hesperides?" Proteus awoke in a fright, and the next instant Hercules found he was holding in his hands no little old man, but a struggling stag. The change was astounding enough, but still Hercules held on tight. Then the stag became a seabird, screaming to be free. The seabird changed to a fierce three-headed dog, the three-headed dog to a savage giant, the giant to a monstrous snake. But the more terrifying were the forms which the old man assumed, the tighter Hercules held him. At last, perceiving that Hercules could not be frightened into letting him go, Proteus appeared in his own rightful form once more and told him the truth. "Go down into Africa," he said, "where the giant Atlas holds up the sky, and Atlas will get the apples for you." So Hercules set out for Africa, but he had scarcely touched the African shore when he was attacked by the terrible giant Antaeus, who let no man pass him alive. This giant was son of the earth, and the most difficult of all giants to conquer, for whenever he was knocked down, he gained fresh strength from the dust and sprang up stronger than ever. But Hercules, knowing it was from the earth his strength had come, lifted him high above his head and held him there, struggling and kicking, separated from the source of his power, till the life was crushed out of him. Then he went again on his way. Being wearied somewhat by the struggle, he soon lay down for a little rest and fell asleep. Suddenly he awoke, feeling as if he had been stung by 1,000 insects. As he sat up and rubbed his eyes, what should he see about but a multitude of pygmies, tiny people no larger than bumblebees, who had climbed up over his body and attacked him with their tiny bows and arrows. Another man might have been angered by their little teasing stings, but Hercules only laughed with a loud resounding guffaw, whereat the pygmies all ran away, save a very few that Hercules caught in his hand and tied up in a corner of his lion skin to take back home to Eurystheus. After this, Hercules wandered on till he saw looming up before him a mountain, it looked to be, yet it was only a giant so tall that the clouds hung about his face like a beard and drifted around his shoulders. He was holding up his hands, and on these and his head he bore the blue dome of the sky. At last, here was Atlas, and Hercules, nothing daunted by the fearful weight of the heavens, under which even Atlas groaned, offered to relieve the giant by bearing the burden himself, if Atlas would get for him 3 golden apples from the garden of Hesperides. Atlas was more than willing, for the nymphs who guarded the apples were his nieces, and to him the adventure was nothing more than a holiday. So Hercules climbed a mountain nearby to be of the giant's height, took the sky on his shoulders, and bore its tremendous weight, while Atlas went off for the apples. In due time, back came the giant, but so much had he enjoyed his holiday that he sought by a trick to give Hercules the slip and leave him forever with the sky on his shoulders. Hercules saw through the trick, however, outwitted the clumsy fellow, and made safely off with the apples. Now that Hercules had accomplished 11 of the 12 labors, Eurystheus was beside himself. He could think of only one task more that it seemed no man could ever achieve. He would send Hercules down into the underworld, the dark and gloomy abode of Pluto, to bring thence the hideous 3-headed watchdog Cerberus. Who that had entered those gloomy gates had ever been known to return? This would of a certain be the end of Hercules, for here, men said, was the abode of death. Hercules journeyed away till he came to a deep chasm between 2 black and frowning rocks. Far, far below gleamed waters black as ink, and now and again strange rumblings as of thunder shook the earth. Here was the only entrance to the underworld. Still Hercules knew no fear. Down into the deep black hole he climbed. There before him, guarding the way, he saw Cerberus, with his 3 savage heads and his tail like a snake. The dog let him enter readily. It would be when he sought again to go out that the creature would make at him. Straight to Pluto's throne, Through the dark and dreary shadows went Hercules, without once turning aside. Of Pluto himself he demanded permission to carry his watchdog back to Mycenae. Pluto was struck with his daring.
"Hercules,"
said he,
"you have done and suffered much, and proved yourself a true hero. Go, therefore, you shall take my watchdog back, if you can conquer him bare-handed."
So Hercules returned once more to the gate. There stood Cerberus, no more quiet, but bristling with rage, showing his savage teeth, and crouching, ready to spring. Hercules lost no time. He seized the dog on the spot with his vice-like grip and dragged him straight off to Eurystheus. When Eurystheus saw this remarkable sight, when he saw that Hercules had conquered even death and come back from that underworld whence men said none could ever return, he at once set his cousin free. At length the terms of his bondage had all been fulfilled. Nevertheless, Eurystheus strictly forbade Hercules ever again to enter the gate of Mycenae. Thereafter, Hercules, now at last his own master, wandered over the earth, ridding the world of many a monstrous evil, and doing mighty deeds for the good of all mankind. When the end of his earth journey came, he laid himself down on a funeral pyre, and bade men set it aflame. Bright, purifying flames sprang, leaping up about him. All that could ever die they burned away. Then the real Hercules, the immortal Hercules, came out from the fire, all shining and glorious. A rainbow appeared in the sky. Lo! It was Iris's bridge that led from earth to heaven. A moment after the clouds broke away, Iris in all her shimmering colors appeared, and Mercury with his winged shoes. Over the rainbow bridge they led the immortal Hercules, as the maid of his dream had promised, to Mount Olympus itself, there to live forever among the gods with all who are truly heroes. End of section 51. Recording by Draconis. The Real Basement Dwellers Podcast. willworkformoney.net. Section 52 of the Treasure Chest of My Bookhouse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Draconis. The Treasure Chest of My Bookhouse. Edited by Olive Beaupré Miller. Thor's Journey to Jotun-Heim, a Norse myth. When the lightning leaps from cliff to cliff across the sky, and the thunder roars and rumbles, reverberating, rolling, crashing, then is the brazen chariot of Thor, the Thunderer, rolling and rattling over the heavens. Thus said the Norsemen, sons of the Northland. From the hooves of the goats that draw his chariot fly blazing sparks. About his head gleams a crown of burning flame. In his strong right hand he grips his red-hot hammer, Mjolnir, from whence spring thunderbolts. It is against the great frost giants who dwell in Jotun-Heim that Thor makes war, the giants who send forth ice and snow and bitter winds to nip the tender buds and kill the flowers, who wrap the earth in wintry mists and ruin harvests by their tempests. It happened once that the storm giants held the earth too long in bondage. Frozen lay the rivers, and frozen the earth till long past the time of the coming of swallows, and no man could till the ground or plant the tender seed. Then from far off Asgard, there dwell the gods, came Thor. Thor, the friend of farmers, Thor, the deliverer, to do battle with the giants. At the close of day, Thor and Loki, his companion, came to a cottage on the edge of a wood. Then rapped Thor on the door with his iron gauntlet, and called those within to give them food and shelter. Shelter the poor people gladly gave, but food they had not to offer. So Thor raised his hammer and slew his own goats to serve for their supper. Amazed stood the poor peasants before him, but thus spake Thor, Eat what ye will, only heed this command. Break no single one of the bones, but cast them all when ye have finished into the skins on the floor. Then Thor ate his fill, and Loki likewise, and the peasant and his wife, and Thialfi their son, and Roskva their daughter. But Thialfi, the greedy one, secretly broke a bone to come at the sweet juicy marrow. Then he cast the pieces onto the skin with the rest of the bones. Early on the morrow up rose Thor from his couch, and over the goats' skins and bones flourished good Mjolnir his hammer. Lithe and light, lively and brisk, up sprang the goats, handsome and whole as before. Only one, alas, limped as he ran. Then Thor knew that someone had disobeyed him. Dark grew his brow at the storm cloud. He raised his powerful hammer, and all stood about in terror. "Someone has disobeyed me!" On his knees fell Thialfi before him, confessing his fault, and such was his sorrow and terror that Thor relented and let his hammer fall harmless. "Rise," he said, "but for thy fault thou and thy sister Roskva shall follow me henceforth and be my servants forever." Then did Thor leave his chariot and his goats in the charge of the peasant, bidding him give them good care against his return. And he set off once more with Loki, Thialfi, and Roskva, on foot for the realm of the giants. All day through a bleak and desolate land they journeyed, into a land of mist and fog and gloom. At nightfall they sought for a shelter. Before them out of the mist loomed dim outlines of a house. They entered a spacious doorway, broad and high. Within was no one, neither fire, nor light, nor food. Flinging themselves wearily on the floor, Thor and his companions fell asleep. Not long had they slept when a strange trembling shook the earth and awoke them, a roar and long-drawn rumbling. "It's an earthquake!" cried Thialfi. Thereat Thor sent Loki and the others for safety into an inner room that seemed to be one of 5 branching off from the outer hall, while he himself stood guard at the door. When day began to dawn, lo, he saw through the mist a tremendous giant lying near, and he perceived that the upheaval which they had thought an earthquake the night before was but the noise of his snoring. Boldly he approached the giant. "Awake!" he cried, "and tell me who thou art."
"Who be I?"
cried the giant, stretching and looking about.
"Skrymir, my little fellow. Skrymir the giant, that's who I be. But where hast thou taken my mitten?"
At that Thor perceived that the house wherein they had slept was naught but the giant's glove. He called his comrades to come forth, and out they stepped from the thumb. Loudly guffawed the giant.
"Ho, ho, little ones," laughed he. "Where do ye journey? Whither away so bold?"
When he heard they were traveling to Jotun-Heim, he offered to be their guide. All day long they journeyed, and all day long did Skrymir belittle them, and make them believe themselves good for naught. At nightfall, ere he dropped off to sleep, he offered them whatever food they might wish to take from the great provision bag that hung on his shoulder. But when they tried to open the bag, not all 4 together, as Skrymir had known, full well, could unfasten the knots by which the giant had tied it. Then was Thor sorely wroth that Skrymir should make them appear such weaklings, and he raised his hammer and dealt him a fearful blow on the forehead. The giant opened one sleepy eye.
"Was that a leaf fell upon me?"
he said. A second time Thor lifted his hammer and hurled it with all his force at the head of the giant. But Skrymir only murmured,
"Methought an acorn dropped on my head."
Now Thor put forth such strength as never he knew he had, and smote the giant on the temple.
"There must be birds overhead," said Skrymir. "A feather now just tickled me."
Then did Thor go back to his comrades. Early on the morrow, Skrymir pointed out the shortest road to Jotun-Heim, and then took leave of his fellows. But first he said,
"O Thor, I would give thee advice. Think not to stand up against the mighty ones, whom thou wilt find in Jotun-Heim. Prepare to bow thyself rather before them, for I be the smallest among them." In spite of his words, on went Thor, and soon there before him and his comrades loomed up a glittering city of ice, with spires and pinnacles of icicles. So high it was that they had to bend back their heads to see its top. Slipping between the enormous bars of the gate, the travelers presented themselves in the great hall before Utgard Loki, the king of the giants, about whom, on the benches, sat his tremendous followers. "Aho!"
cried the king of the giants, squinting contemptuously down, as if at some little fly on the floor, which he could scarcely discover.
"Whom have we here? Little Thor, as I live, out of Asgard. I have heard thou art small, but in truth I had never thought so small. 'Tis said thou hast strength, though, and can perform many great exploits. I scarce can believe it. Yet come, let us see what thou and thy comrades can do against my giants. Choose your feat. At what will ye first contend?
Then cried Loki, who had fasted long enough to feel great hunger,
In eating I will contend with any man among ye.
A great platter of meat the king ordered into the hall, and summoned his servant, Logi, to contend with Loki. Loki sat himself at one end of the platter, and Logi at the other, and both began to eat. Like an honest man a-hungered, ate Loki, but when he was come to the center of the platter, there he met Logi, and while Loki had eaten but the meat, the giant had devoured meat and bones and platter as well.
Not much can ye do at eating,
scornful cried Utgard-Loki. Then did Thor, nettled and keenly athirst, offer to outdo anyone at drinking. Immediately was brought a horn, which the king declared strong men emptied at 1 draught, weaker men at 2, and the veriest weaklings at 3. Eagerly Thor applied his lips to the rim, but though he drank long and deep, the water seemed not to grow less by so much a hair's breadth. Again he tried, and again the horn remained ever full.
Not much can ye do at drinking,
scornful cried Utgard-Loki. Then cried Thialfi that he would run a race with any among the giants. Came one named Hugi, and though Thialfi kept hot on his heels in 3 different races, Hugi ever outstripped him.
Not much can ye do at running,
scornful cried Utgard-Loki. Next shouted Thor that he would contend in lifting.
Lift me then my house-cat, cried the king. 'Tis a trifling game at which we only exercise children. I should never propose it to Thor, save that I have found him so puny and little stripling.
Angrily Thor seized the cat. At first he could not budge her. Then he arched her back from the ground. Then he lifted one mighty paw. The faces of the giants turned pale. Still Utgard-Loki called,
Not much can ye do at lifting.
Last of all cried Thor in a fury, Let me contend at wrestling.
My poor old nurse, Ellie, belike is a fit match for thee,
jibed the king, and into the hall came a feeble old hag, weak-seeming and bent nearly double. Yet she seized Thor in a grip, like a vice. Valiantly he struggled, but the more he tightened his hold, the firmer stood Ellie, till at last she had him on his knees. Then cried Utgard-Loki,
No more will we contend, in truth, ye are good for naught.
On the morrow at daybreak, Thor and his comrades, sad and heavy-hearted, set out once more for home. Utgard-Loki accompanied them outside the gates of the city. Once there, he cried,
How now, Thor? Hast thou met mightier men than thou?
Is it so easy as thou didst think to conquer the giants? Nay, Thor made honest answer. I have come off badly. My heart sinks at the shame that I have proved such a weakling. Then was the king struck with the blunt and open truth of him, who never yet uttered untruth, and he cried,
O Thor of Asgard, thou goest hence from my kingdom, forever and I trust, and now will I too speak the truth. Not by superior force, as ye think, have ye been defeated. It has all been done by magic. All things have been made to seem to you other than they were. Even have we made you think yourselves weak and puny, when our very bones rattled for trembling and fear of your strength. I myself am Skrymir, and any one of thy mighty blows would have done for me, had I not in the mist which distorts all things out of their natural shape, made thee believe a mountain my head. Not me didst thou strike, but the mountain. Logi, against whom Loki contended in eating, is Wildfire, the devourer. Hugi, against whom Thialfi ran, is Thought. And who could run faster than Thought? The horn from which thou, Thor, didst drink is connected with the ocean, so thou couldst never have drained it, unless thou couldst drink dry the ocean. Ellie the wrestler is Old Age, who throws so many strong men, and the cat thou couldst not lift is the Midgard serpent that encircles the world. Yet didst thou nearly outdo Logi, Hugi, and Ellie, and lift the Midgard serpent, and thou didst drink so much of the sea that on earth men thought the tide had gone out. By trickery only have we kept you from your triumph, but in trickery we are clever. If ye be wise, come no more against us. With deception and illusion will we meet you always.
Then in his righteous wrath Thor lifted up his hammer. The might that was his, the power that was his, once more he knew. But as he swung good Mjolnir, the giant vanished. Vanished, too, the whole city of freezing ice and snow. Retreated had the giants before the power of Thor, perceived by them when to Thor himself his prowess had seemed so little. Fled had the giants before him. Then once more smiled the earth, free from the fetters of frost, ready for seed and bloom. And back to Asgard went Thor with Loki, Thialfi, and Roskva. Thor, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. I am the god Thor. I am the war god. I am the thunderer. Here in my Northland, my fastness and fortress, reign I forever. Here amid icebergs rule I the nations. This is my hammer, Mjolnir the mighty. Giants and sorcerers cannot withstand it. From the Saga of King Olaf. End of section 52. Recording by Draconis, the Real Basement Dwellers podcast. willworkformoney.net.
Section 53 of the Treasured Chest of My Bookhouse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Grace Garrett. The Treasured Chest of My Bookhouse. Edited by Olive Beaupré Miller. Thor by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. I am the god Thor. I am the war god. I am the thunderer. Here in my Northland, my fastness and fortress, reign I forever. Here amid icebergs rule I the nations. This is my hammer, Mjolnir the mighty. Giants and sorcerers cannot withstand it. From the Saga of King Olaf. End of section 53.
Section 54 of The Treasure Chest of My Bookhouse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jill Ingle. The Treasure Chest of My Bookhouse. Edited by Olive Beaupré Miller. The Stealing of Iduna, a Norse myth. It happened once that Odin, the Allfather, king of the gods, with Honir, his brother, and Loki, the mischief-maker, started out of Asgard, the home of the gods, down across the bridge of the rainbow to journey around the world. At eventide they came to a densely wooded mountain, and being an-hungered, yet finding no dwelling in sight, they caught an ox from a herd that stood grazing near, and dressed the meat for their supper. Then did Loki, god of fire, kindle a flame to cook the food. But the time being come for the meat to be done, lo, it was raw, as in the beginning. Another fire made Loki, but all in vain. As raw was the meat as before. Then Loki, Odin, and Honir heard a noise in the branches above them. Looking up, they perceived an eagle, fanning the meat with his wings, and sending a cold wind upon it that prevented it from roasting. "Done to a turn will be your meat," croaked the eagle, "if you will promise me as much as I can eat." "Nay, then," cried the three out of Asgard, "join us and eat what thou wilt." So the eagle left off fanning the meat. It was soon cooked, and they all went to help themselves. But the eagle, first of all, seized 3/4 of the whole ox. Then was Loki angered. Seizing a stick lying near, he began to belabor the greedy bird. No sooner had he done so than one end of the pole stuck fast in the eagle's feathers, and the other stuck fast to Loki's hands. Up flew the bird, and off trailed Loki after him, scraped through briery thickets and straggling branches of trees, jammed against rocks and stones, his arms nearly torn from their sockets, so was Loki dragged. Then he knew that the eagle was in truth no eagle, but Thiassi, the fierce frost giant. In vain he begged for mercy. The bird flew on the faster. Again and again he begged. "On one condition only will I let thee go," croaked Thiassi, "that thou lure out of Asgard the lovely Iduna, and give her into my power, with a dish of her magic apples, partaking of which keeps the dwellers in Asgard forever young." At length Thiassi wrung from Loki the sorry promise to do as he bade him, and Loki was set free. Bedraggled and torn, back went Loki to Asgard. Now Iduna, spirit of the spring and of immortal youth, was loveliest of all the goddesses in Asgard. Tender green were her garments, on her head a wreath of flowers. Lightly she glided over the earth. At her approach the trees burst into bloom. Myriads of flowers sprang up, tinkling brooks awoke and laughed and leapt for joy. Everywhere was stir, activity, and life. Never was age where Iduna was, but always youth, eternal youth. And Iduna kept carefully guarded in her charge a tree that bore wonderful apples, which made him who ate them forever young. It was to partake of that eternal youth that the cruel frost giant wished to get possession of Iduna and her apples. The husband of Iduna was Bragi, the god of poesy, who sings the wondrous song of life that scales the highest heavens and searches the depths of hell. Whenever he sings and plays on his golden harp, the flowers that spring up at Iduna's approach reveal their inmost charm and grace. The blending colors of earth and sky reveal their inmost harmony. The laughter of brooks, the songs of birds reveal their inmost joy. All nature finds a tongue and speaks and yields up the very secret of her being. To separate Iduna from Bragi was no easy task, but Loki waited until he saw the minstrel go forth on a journey from Asgard to earth, leaving Iduna unguarded. Then the mischief-maker went whither Iduna wandered alone in the midst of her flowery gardens. "Iduna," said he, "just without the gates of Asgard, I have found a tree that bears finer apples than thine. Sweeter to the taste are they, and lovelier, and indeed I doubt not they restore youth and strength as well as thine." "Nay now," cried Iduna, "in all the world are none such apples as mine." "Come then with me and see," said Loki, "and bring with thee a dish of thine own apples, that we may compare the two." Into a crystal dish did Iduna then put her precious apples, and off with the wily Loki she went. Scarcely were the two without the safe protected gates of Asgard, than Thiassi, in his eagle plumage, swooped down upon Iduna. As the storm swoops, as the storm rushes, when down from the mountain tops the wild north wind comes roaring, so came Thiassi. From his frosty wings fell snow. From his breath exhaled the cold that blasted all about. In his talons he seized Iduna, and bore her off to his wintry home in the storm-bound land of Thrymheim. There he shut her up in a chamber in the rocks, against which all day long resounded the boom and crash of the sea. Each day he came and asked her to give him a bite of her apples, for not unless Iduna herself gave out the precious fruit would he who partook thereof find his youth and strength renewed, and every day Iduna stoutly refused. He whined and begged and threatened in vain, for no such creature of evil was the gift of eternal youth, and when Thiassi himself thrust his great fist in the dish to seize an apple, the fruit only dwindled and shrunk till it disappeared altogether. Long were the days, long were the months, while Iduna stayed in Thrymheim. In Asgard the heavens, and Midgard the earth, spring and summer were gone. Cold winter held sway. Leaves turned brown and fell. Bird-songs were hushed. Flowers withered and drooped on their stalks. Brooklets froze up into motionless silence, and all things seemed old and dying. In Asgard Old age came stealing even upon the gods. Where, oh, where was Iduna? Bragi mourned for her. Odin mourned for her, mourned all the dwellers in Asgard, mourned all the people of earth. Then did Odin, the All-Father, summon a council to consider what should be done. Thither all Asgard gathered, save Loki. Loki dared not appear. When Odin perceived that Loki alone was absent, he ordered Bragi to fetch him, the maker of mischief. In the presence of Odin, before the might of his majesty, Loki was forced to pour out the tale of what he had done. Sternly Odin bade him go and bring back Iduna, or never more dare show his face in Asgard. So Loki borrowed of the goddess Freya her cloak of falcon feathers, and with this he was able to fly over land and sea to the rock-bound coast of Thrymheim. Here in her gloomy cell he found the lovely Iduna. Thiassi, it chanced, was from home, so Loki forced his way through a narrow opening into her prison. Much she rejoiced to see him. He turned her at once into a swallow, and flew off with her in his talons. Not far had he gone, when he heard a rushing behind him. There in rapid pursuit was Thiassi. On and on flew Loki. On and on flew Thiassi, gaining little by little. On the walls of Asgard stood the gods, wrinkled and bent and gray, watching far to southward over the sea, watching, longing for the coming of Iduna. At length they made out the falcon, Loki, and Thiassi hot on his heels. Long and anxiously watched they. Now Thiassi seemed pouncing on Loki's back, but always Loki escaped and flew with his precious burden on and on and on. As he neared the city of refuge, Loki's strength seemed almost failing. Then up rose the dwellers in Asgard, and lit great fires on the walls that leapt and flamed to the heavens. Safe through the blaze and smoke dashed Loki, Loki the god of fire, but when Thiassi, creature of cold and storm, plunged blundering through, down he fell, suffocating, to his end, beneath the mighty hammer of Thor. Then Loki let loose the swallow, and up sprang the lovely Iduna herself, to be tenderly welcomed by Bragi, Odin, and all the rest. And with Iduna and her apples, back to Asgard came youth and the joyous life of the spring. End of section 54. Recording by Jill Ingle.
Section 55 of the Treasure Chest of My Bookhouse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Itel Bus. The Treasure Chest of My Bookhouse, edited by Olive Beaupré Miller. How the Goddess of Spring Came to Scoring, by Charles Kingsley. White were the moorlands, and frozen before her. Green were the moorlands, and blooming behind her. Out of her gold locks, shaking the spring flowers. Out of her garments shake the south wind. Around in the birches, awaken the throstles, and making chaste housewives all, long for their hero's home, loving in love given, came she to scoring. From the Longbeard's Saga. End of section 55. End of the Treasure Chest of My Bookhouse. Edited by Olive Beaupré Miller.